Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Mind, Body, and Spirit Connection, Health and Healing from a Native Perspective. My name is Julia Gavin, and I'm an intern at the American Indian Resource Center. I use she, they pronouns, and I am Diné and Blackfeet. Our event touches on Native health as three aspects: mind, body, and spirit. Tonight, we'll be discussing the intersection between Indigenous and Western health. In relation to spirit, this intersection has been overwhelmingly harmful. This event will touch on the history, sacrality, and appropriation of Native spirituality. We'll end our event with a brief presentation on Native resilience in the face of historical hardship we faced. This event is funded by the Radical Resilience Initiative. This campus-wide initiative seeks to address historical systems of oppression through social justice, healing, and collaboration. We thank them for their support in this event.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kamiko Hostler. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a member of the Hoopa Valley tribe. And I'm a second-year intern at the AIRC. Before we begin, we'd like to let everyone know that we're recording tonight's event. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Amanda Collins. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am Muskogee Creek, and I am also a lead intern for the American Indian Resource Center. UC Santa Cruz is located on the unceded territory of the Awaswa-speaking Yupi tribe. The Amamitsan tribal band, comprised of the descendants of the indigenous people taken to Mission Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during the Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah. I use she, her pronouns, and I am Paiute, Shoshone, and Pomo, and I am one of the lead interns for the AIRC. The AIRC is dedicated to supporting the needs of American Indian students at UCSC and is one of 6 resource centers on campus. The AIRC is also home to the People of Color Sustainability Collective. Throughout the year, we host speakers, workshops, and presentations that raise awareness about issues that pertain to Indigenous peoples. Can I get the next slide, please? Thank you. The AIRC Mind, Body, and Spirit series was created in hopes of educating our campus community on Indigenous understandings of health. Our goals with this series are to foster a holistic understanding of healing, expand understandings of health outside of Western practice, deconstruct stereotypes and stigmas surrounding Indigenous healing practices, and recognize Indigenous perspectives of health as legitimate and valid. Our first event focused on the mind. Our guest speaker was Dr. Bonnie Duran. Dr. Duran is a renowned Native public health professor and practitioner who has pioneered the development and application of community-based participatory research and other forms of community-engaged research. She has also helped to articulate and disseminate the theory of historical trauma. The overall goals of Duran's research and practice are to work in partnership with communities to design treatment and prevention efforts that are effective, empowering, sustainable, and that have maximum public health impact. Doctors Lisa Martin and Catherine Morsay were our guests last Friday. They spoke about how the physical health of Indigenous populations has typically been neglected and overlooked. While Native healing traditions are still being practiced, their impact is often dismissed in Western medical practice. Doctors Martin and Morsay are both knowledge conveyors of valuable medical and traditional teachings and cultural revitalizers. The information they shared demonstrates how Western and Indigenous medicine can be integrated together to heal Indigenous bodies. Their experiences in healthcare also serve to stimulate discourse around equity in modern day healthcare. Both of these events have been posted to our YouTube channel for those who would like to watch or rewatch.
If at any point during the event you have a question for the speakers, please submit it using the Q&A function on Zoom. We will do our best to ask your questions during the Q&A session following the presentation. Thank you. And now, everyone, please welcome our first presenter, Kamiko.
Hey young killit Kamiko Hostler Juliet Natinakwe Kiwin Yahinya Dehitched Out Te Ataktimithimith. Hello everyone, my name is Kamiko Hostler and I'm a member of the Hoopa Valley tribe. Today I'll be discussing some of the sacred practices of Native people as well as the diversity among Native tribes. Native people have been practicing our traditions for thousands of years. There are over 500 federally recognized tribes in the United States, and we're all different and we celebrate those differences. Pre-contact spiritual practices were and continue to be an integrated part of every aspect of Native life in what is now the US. From gathering food, changing of seasons, birth and death, to sacred ceremonies, Native people had specific traditions and prayers to honor every phase of life. Our traditions go deeper than just a connection to the Creator. They allow us to form a deep connection to the land and water that surrounds us. As Native people, we understand ourselves as stewards of the land because it has been left to us to care for. Our traditional ceremonies provide opportunities to honor the gifts of the land, renewal of ourselves and our community, and to pray for the healing and protection of our people. For Native people, prayer often takes the form of songs and dances. Every aspect of a ceremony exists to honor the Creator, our ancestors, and bring healing or balance into the world. These ceremonies occur at different points in the year, depending on the seasons or current events. The clothing we wear during ceremonies is referred to as regalia and has deep meaning to the people who wear it. Our regalia is made with prayers and good intentions. It holds a very deep significance because it provides the dancers with a way to protect themselves by calling on the strength of their ancestors and community during the ceremony. Native traditions and ceremonies are not just for show, they're rooted in our past retelling of where we came from and where we're looking to go. This is a short video about the significance of song as a form of prayer from a member of my tribe.
I grew up in a cultural ceremony family, and ever since I was a little kid, I was always humming. And people always ask me, like, whose song is that? And I'm like, I don't know. It just comes to me, and it's crazy because no matter where I am, because my dad's people are water people and river people, and whenever I'm next to water, that's where I get my strength. Whenever I'm having a hard time, whenever I need to think, I go to the creek, and I'll start getting these tunes, and I'll start humming, and then I think to myself, like, whose song is that? Then I start humming, and all of a sudden I'm singing out loud. And it's crazy because then that's how they come to me, through the water, because I'll sit there and I'll watch the currents of the river, and I'll listen to the beat that it has. And to me, it sounds like the beat of a heart as it goes down and along the river. And that's how all my songs become, to the beat of the heart, to the beat of the river, and that's what they mean to me. And in our culture, songs are our prayers. The louder we sing, the more power that comes out, and the higher it gets carried to the heavens. And that's what songs mean to us, is they're our prayer. And that's why when we share it with our people, it's a blessing, not only for who's hearing it, but for the person who's singing it.
This video shows the power of song and highlights the importance of song and prayer in connection with the land and water.
I grew up in a cultural...
I will now introduce the topic of pan-Indianism. It is a term used to describe a mix of Native people, and it is a term used to express unity among different Indigenous groups in the Americas regardless of tribal distinction and cultural differences. Pan-Indian celebrations and gatherings help connect Native people who may not live on their reservation or near others in their community. As Native people, we need community, but due to the displacement of Native people after contact, many Native people have been separated from their tribe and are unfamiliar with their practices. Pan-Indianism was a way to create a Native space that isn't specific to any one tribe, but allows Native people to build community in urban areas and off the reservation. One example of pan-Indianisms are powwows. and powwow dancing, like fancy dance and jingle dress dancing, among many other types of dance. Another form of pan-Indianism is sweat lodge, which has become a sort of way to instill community through a traditional Native practice among all Native identifying individuals. Here's an example of some powwow dancers in their regalia. Powwows are a pan-Indian public celebration of Native American culture where people from diverse indigenous nations gather for the purpose of dancing, singing, and honoring their communities. Everyone, Native and non-Native, are welcome at powwows. At a powwow, you will see drum groups who play large drums and sing. Powwow singers are a very important part of powwow culture. Without them, there would be no dancing. There are two types of drum groups, Northern and Southern. The songs they sing are powerful reminders of our pan-Indian traditions. Dances are also a very big part of powwows, just as they have always been a very important part of Native people's lives. The dances seen at powwows are social dances, and they have traditions and meanings of their own. The regalia, or clothing and accessories worn by dancers, like the styles of clothes today, have evolved over time. Culture is not stagnant, but vibrant and changing. Regalia worn at powwows is different from a specific tribe dance. Some of it isn't very colorful, others are not. The styles of dances seen at powwows include chicken, grass, fancy, straight, and northern traditional for the men. The women dance buckskin, cloth, jingle, and fancy shawl. Depending on the region, you may see other dance styles such as smoke, bird, or gourd dancing. This video I'm about to show shows jingle dress dancing at a powwow and talks about its origins in relation to powwow dancing.
Sasa quick!
Although powwows are a way for Native people to feel connected to one another, no matter the tribe they originate from, it's also important to acknowledge that all Native tribes are diverse and different from one another. In the United States, there are 574 federally recognized tribes. Federally recognized tribes are tribes that have treaty agreements with the United States. They are sovereign nations that have a government-to-government relationship with the US. There are also state-recognized tribes like the Amamutsan Tribal Band, the original inhabitants of Santa Cruz. Every tribe has unique language, dances, ceremonies, traditional food sources, style of dancing, art, and housing. A tribe in California is going to have a much different housing, diet, and clothing than a tribe in New York City or Oklahoma, given the weather, local landscape, and animals local to the area. Tribes that are neighbors may have similarities in traditional practices and ceremonies. An example of this would be the Northern California tribes, Hoopa, Yurok, and Karuk. We all have salmon as a staple in our diet due to all the local rivers, but we don't speak the same language or share many of the same sacred ceremonies. It's really important to understand that Native people are very diverse. We have very different cultural practices, language, and traditions. Our team is a great example of that. Our team members represent tribes from all over the country, Mexico and Guatemala. We all appreciate our differences and take great pride in our own individual tribes. Every Native community has sacred practices and ceremonies that are part of our longstanding traditions. They honor our ancestors and our future. They are not for entertainment and should not be treated as such. Many of these ceremonies have been going on for thousands of years, and they are sacred to us, and they will continue. Next, we'll hear from Amanda, who will share about sacred practices in the history of the U.S. laws and regulations.
Thank you, Kimiko. Now that we've established what Native spirituality can look like, we'd like to talk about the harm that resulted from being banned from our practices and the laws that were put into place to protect our rights to ceremony. Before we begin our presentation, I'd like to send a quick poll out to you, the audience. And I'd like to pose 2 questions. Have you ever heard of any of the following acts? And true or false, the First Amendment protects Native Americans' rights to religious practices. I'll give you some time to answer. Thank you, everyone. So according to most of these results, people have generally heard of some of these acts, but a good portion have not, about 44%. And about a split even vote for false, and it's complicated for the second answer. Thank you, everyone. And as I go on, I will be expanding more on these subjects. The American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978. After decades of litigation and protests, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, or ARFA, was finally signed into law in 1978. ARFA is a U.S. federal law and joint resolution of Congress meant to protect the religious rights and ceremonial practices of American Indian, Alaskan Native, and Native Hawaiian folks. If you could please move to the next slide. Thank you. These rights include the right to access to sacred sites, repatriation of sacred objects held by museums, the freedom to worship through traditional ceremonial rites, including while incarcerated, and the use and possession of items considered sacred. As this act is a federal act, it does not apply to local and state governments or private companies. There are several infringement issues that fall under ARFA. These include preservation and access to sacred lands, the right to religious use of substances, the right to recover religious objects, and the rights of students and incarcerated Indians. Laws similar to ARFA include the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA, which pertains specifically to Indian burial sites, and also the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, which governs the excavation of archaeological sites. Why do we need ARFA? ARFA was created to eliminate government interference with Natives' free exercise of religion. This law stemmed after years of discrimination from the federal government towards Native American spiritual practices. Because Indigenous practices had such stark differences from predominant religions at the time, namely Christianity, most Americans dismissed our practices or construed them as evil. This resulted in de facto laws such as the 1883 Code of Indian Offenses that applied only to American Indians and our ceremonies. These laws punished Indian dances and feasts with threat of imprisonment or withholding food rations for up to 30 days. Medicine men who were convicted of encouraging others to follow traditional practices were sentenced to prison for no less than 10 days, or until he could provide evidence that he had abandoned his beliefs. During the same time period, the government was promoting Christian education among Native Americans. A decade prior, the administration of President Ulysses S. Grant made 13 Protestant denominations responsible for managing more than 70 Indian agencies on or near reservations and allotted them 160 acres of federal land to support their institutions. This demonstrates a bias against Native American traditional practices who were not offered similar federal resources in their own cultural ceremonies. Furthermore, well-intentioned acts, such as the making of national parks, opened sacred lands up to the general public, infringing upon Native American private ceremonies and sacred sites. To better understand the interwovenness of our spirituality and ERFA's impact, here is a short video clip.
You know, we're sun gazers, we're sun worshippers, and that was taken away from us for 60 years by the U.S. government. And we took it back in 1978. We, with the American Indian Religious Freedom Act.
I, as a child, was not privy to my own rite of passage. I was a Christian. I was baptized. I was given a Christian name. And so I learned the American way. Spirituality is innate. It's all of us. It's in every part of us, our bodies, our realm, our homes, and it's every day. So we're in a different time and space when it comes to our spirituality. It's not a God box on a street corner one time a week to say you're sorry and go back and do it again. We co-founded the Women of All Red Nations in 1978 to begin the journey and the building of our nation, rebuilding it spiritually, because we needed that spiritual base more than anything to build from within ourselves.
You know, we're sun gazers.
As you can see, Native spirituality is a constant state of being, vital to who we are as a culture. It is woven into every aspect of Native American life, extending beyond the scope of traditional religious institutions. To be prevented from expressing our ceremonies was, in a sense, taking away a vital piece of our lives. ERFA is an essential tool for helping us to keep that right intact. And as I asked before, whether or not there are shortcomings to the First Amendment, the answer is it's very complicated, but leaning more towards false. While the First Amendment states that Congress will not make a law promoting one religion over another or restricting individual right to practice, American Indian ceremonial needs were not taken into account at the time of creation. Even if the Founding Fathers had Native Americans in mind at the time of the Constitution's creation, there was no attitude or voice from the nation to support this. ERFA makes an attempt to remedy this by incorporating explicit protections for American Indian religious rights, calling for direct action from the federal government, and requiring consultations from Native American tribes when creating laws regarding American Indian peoples. It also reinforces the presence and legitimacy of our spiritual practices. As said by Kurt Bludog, co-director for the Native American Rights Fund, the purpose of ERFA is to ensure to the Native American the right to believe, express, and practice his religion in his traditional way by clearly establishing comprehensive and consistent federal policy directed toward protecting and preserving Native American religious freedom. Historically, the lack of knowledge, unawareness, insensitivity, and neglect have often been keynotes of the federal government's interaction with traditional Indian culture and religion. Among other things, it is the insensitive enforcement procedures. There are a few instances where ERFA has made a significant impact. For instance, Emmett Oliver, a Quinault man, wanted to restore canoe carving traditions among tribal members. While the introduction of automobiles and roads took away the necessity of canoes as a means of travel, Oliver wanted to use canoe carving to improve community relations and connect youth to culture. Unfortunately, access to old-growth cedars, the traditional canoe material, was limited, as many had been chopped down for logging or stood upon protected federal lands. To remedy this, Oliver, tribal leaders, and the federal government worked under the guide of ERFA to gain access to old-growth cedars growing near Baker Lake. These trees were transported to the Swinomish, Upper Skagit, Nooksack, Lume tribes for ceremonial use. These canoe journeys continued to make a significant contribution to reviving the Coast Salish culture. To wrap up our discussion on ERFA, here's a short interview with Oliver explaining the impact of his work with the federal government on his community.
First of all, maybe it would be interesting for you to tell us how you got involved in this project.
Well, there is a little story to it. There was a suggestion that if we're going to cover the maritime history, we've got to involve and recognize the fact that there was a mode of transportation on water that long superseded what we have today. So if we're going to tell a complete story of the history, then we've got to involve the native aspect. There was also an awareness among Indian people to revive, let's tell some stories, let's depict and bring out what we can hear from the elders so the children will learn. And this is pretty universal amongst Indians to want their children to learn what it was like. This is the way we had it. This was our language, this was our culture, this is the way, these were our songs. Native canoe is only one aspect, but it represents so much of the daily life, of the spiritual life. For instance, you see the blessing of the tree is that I'm not taking your life as I cut you down. I'm trading that life for a new life, which will be born in the canoe. And that's what made the canoe so revered, almost revered, is that it also had life because it gave them so much, and their whole livelihood depended upon water transportation. All the people lived around the water, and they needed this kind of thing. So the canoe sort of lent itself as a symbol of what we call a culture element.
First of all, maybe it
Thank you. Now I will pass the mic over to Julia, who will be discussing the historical appropriation and commodification of religious practices. Here you go, Julia.
Thank you, Amanda. Before I begin, I'd just like to announce to the audience and remind you all that if you have any questions at any point during the presentations, please ask them in our Q&A box in Zoom, and we will get to them after Sarah's presentation. So now that Amanda has covered legislation regarding rights to practicing culture, I'd like to talk about the appropriation and commodification of Native spiritual practices by non-Natives. While acts like IRFA sought to restore Native Americans' freedom of religion and tradition, they didn't really account for the ways in which the practicing of these would be received by non-Native communities. And first, I'll be defining some terms that I'll use throughout the presentation. All of the definitions are from dictionary.com. So cultural appropriation is the adoption or co-opting, usually without acknowledgement, of cultural identity markers associated with or originating in minority communities by people or communities with a relatively privileged status. Commodification is the act or fact of turning something into an item that can be bought and sold, or the act or fact of exploiting a person or thing for profit. So why is appropriation harmful? Well, going back to Amanda's presentation on the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, it is important to recognize that post-colonization, Native Americans have only been able to legally practice our religions and spiritual traditions for 42 years. The period of time during which it was illegal proved to be devastating for our communities. Traditions were forgotten, languages were lost, and spiritual practices suffered. So, when acknowledging the fact that Natives have only been allowed to legally reclaim and practice our culture for less than 50 years, it is offensive when non-Natives feel like they can freely practice something that has had such a traumatic history for us, especially when they have no ethnic or cultural connection to Native people. There have been some laws and legislation passed in an effort to better protect our cultural heritage from co-opting, but they only go so far as to protect it financially, especially when people want to profit from it. So in 1990, the Indian Arts and Crafts Act was passed. This policy criminalized the misrepresentation and mismarketing of Indian art and craft product within the United States and makes it illegal to offer or display for sale or sell any art or craft product in a manner that falsely suggests it is Indian produced, an Indian product, or the product of a particular Indian or Indian tribe or Indian arts and crafts organization resident within the United States. Essentially, the IACA made it illegal for non-Indians to sell items marketed as Indian or Indian-made product. So while this law did intend to protect Native American products from being profited by non-Natives, it really doesn't offer much tangible protection. Non-Natives can still sell traditional art pieces and items as long as they don't market them as such. And the way around this is through the rebranding and dilution of Native spiritual items just as spiritual items. And one of the newly emerging issues regarding cultural appropriation by non-Natives is through the beauty and wellness industry in relation to the reemergence of New Age spirituality. New Age spirituality is defined as a range of spiritual or religious beliefs and practices which rapidly grew in the Western world during the 1970s, and has been making a comeback in recent years. The popularization of more natural beliefs present in ethnic or other minority religions have been adopted as part of this movement, removing their cultural value and watering down their roots. The rise of holistic and natural wellness methods within this movement has brought forth a legitimization of spiritual health in response to a growing technologically reliant world, which on the surface does seem like a positive change. However, this has unfortunately given rise to the adoption of Native practices by non-Natives without the recognition of their complicated histories. This in turn contributes to the continued erasure of specifically Indigenous practices, and thus the overall erasure of our peoples and cultures globally. Ojibwe journalist Mariannette Pember wrote an article on this, where she said, Native Americans are pushing back against the beauty and wellness companies and challenging what they describe as wanton cultural appropriation by non-Natives eager for a quick fix to the disease associated with tech-heavy lives. One example of this New Age appropriation is smudging. Smudging is the ancient Native American practice of burning dried plants in spiritual ceremonies. Various plants are incorporated into the practice depending on where the tribes are, including cedar, sage, sweetgrass, and tobacco. I will now read from Pember's article on this topic. Smudging's popularity is in line with the larger trend in the beauty and wellness industry of melding the spiritual beauty and wellness regimens include crystals and white sage wands to banish negative thoughts interfering with achieving one's most optimal self. Spiritual growth is undoubtedly a good thing, but many Native Americans are troubled by the beauty and wellness industry's marketing of practices and items associated with their prayer rituals. So the United States federally recognizes 574 tribes, and there are countless others that aren't recognized, but that doesn't mean they aren't legitimate. Many tribes practice smudging through the intentional burning of plants local to their tribal lands. One of the increasingly popularized plants being appropriated and smudged by non-natives is white sage, or Salvia apiana, which is native to California, and thus many Californian tribes use it. Alicia Goodsoldier of the Diné and Spirit Lake Dakota Nations has given her thoughts on the issue this creates, saying, "This is a medicine for many of our people who have used these plants since time immemorial as central elements of our spirituality and healing. They are having trouble finding sage because of fires and overharvesting." So, not only does the appropriation of spiritual practices create cultural and identity-related harm, but it has devastating effects on our natural world, which is even more alarming when you take into consideration the fact that Native Americans have always been traditional stewards of our lands, but are now unable to protect them from the consequences of cultural theft. The aesthetic and growing spiritual popularity of burning white sage has started to take a toll on the environment. The high demand for sage has led to its overharvesting by what Pember calls wildcrafters for sale to retail chain stores and brands is threatening the survival of white sage. Although not listed as an endangered species, it's considered to be a plant of special concern by conservationists and illegal to harvest from public lands. Pember summarizes the outcomes of non-native appropriation of spiritual practices, saying, "For Native peoples, the impact of uninvited application of their cultural practices cuts deeply. Although non-natives may be unaware of wrongdoing, the adoption of smudging is another in a long line of colonial predation of Native nations that have seen nearly everything, their lands, languages, and cultures, taken from them in the name of progress and civilization. Worse still is the cavalier manner in which rituals are stripped of protocol and community. For Natives, it's the final insult and a sign of disrespect to see their practices tossed into the greater blender of upscale trendiness." Lastly, you can't adopt aspects of Native spirituality. It's not a religion that's open to everyone. Instead, Native spirituality is more of an identity and cultural or ethnic lifestyle, one that comes with the individual racial or ethnic identification as Native American or Indigenous, and varies from tribe to tribe. There is a difference between cultural appropriation and appreciation. The usage of Native spiritual practices by non-natives is cultural appropriation. Appreciation in this sense would be the recognition of Native spiritual practices as closed and not open to participation from non-Native people unless given permission. So, while it is wonderful to see people turning to holistic and natural remedies for their medical and spiritual ailments, it should not be at the expense of Native Americans. Additionally, organizations such as the Native Trading Instagram account, Tradish Trading, have created opportunities for non-natives to give back to Indigenous communities. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. It is key to acknowledge that a lot of non-natives who do burn white sage or smudge with other sacred spiritual plants were not aware of the cultural significance when making these purchases. If you have done this and you'd like to redistribute these sacred cultural items, consider donating them to Tradish Trading, where they will be given back to the proper Indigenous communities. It's a productive first step in the greater effort to provide reparations and cultural recognition to the Native community. However, this is just one option for those who would like to make amends and support. You can support us in the fight for cultural reclamation and restoration by buying Native-made and distributed products, supporting the movement for Native land sovereignty and stewardship, and by being part of conversations where you learn about these complicated histories and are given the tools to be better equipped to address issues similar to this one. Thank you. Next, Sarah will continue this conversation in relation to capitalism. Please give her a warm welcome.
Can I get the next slide, please? Thank you. So Julia's presentation is actually a great segue into tonight's final presentation, where I will focus on specific examples of the commodification of Native spirituality in response to consumerism and tourism, industries that have emerged out of the system of capitalism. Can I get the next slide? Thank you. Before we dive into our examples, I'd first like to provide some definitions. These definitions are brought to you courtesy of Merriam-Webster. Capitalism is defined as an economic system characterized by private or corporate ownership of capital goods. Consumerism is the protection or promotion of the consumer's interests. Tourism is the practice of traveling for recreation. And lastly, to commodify something means to treat a thing like a product that can be bought and sold. Usually this thing is something that cannot be owned, nor does everyone have a right to it. Earlier, we emphasized that natives are not a monolithic people and that spirituality and religion looks different for every tribe, especially when you consider the number of tribes, federally recognized or not, there are in the United States. Despite the diversity in our spiritualities, there is a common thread that runs through all native spiritual and religious beliefs. In her article, The New Age Movements, Appropriation, and Native Spirituality, Suzanne Miskimen says, Native spirituality is revered for its connections to the earth and its respect for harmony and balance in all things. Native people's spirituality is inherently rooted in their connection to the earth and to all things living. Many Native tribes have creation stories that tell of their people descending from animals or the natural elements, such as the sky, the water, the land, the stars, etc. Our people were given instructions by the Creator on how to care for the land so that it cares for us in return. It is the natural traditional way of being for Native people to live in reciprocity with the earth, and this has been the case since time immemorial. Quoted in the 1996 documentary film White Shamans and Plastic Medicine Men, Jeanette McLeod of the Tulalip Nation says, "First they came to take our land and water. Then they wanted our mineral resources. Now they want our religion as well." In saying this, she refers to the appropriation and capital exploitation of Native spirituality by non-Native people, particularly white people. So here we will look at our first example of the commodification of Native spirituality. Jemsy will play a clip from the film and we'll discuss a bit of it afterwards. I'm not hearing the sound in the clip. That's weird. No, I don't, the sound isn't working still. Maybe you can check the settings on the video, Jemsy, like the format options.
Sorry, y'all. One sec.
Yeah, apologies for the technical issues. There we go.
Your birth date falls in the realm of you are a raven. Your spirit keeper is Mujikiwis. Mujikiwis translates into English from Lakota is grizzly bear. So I take this general information and we do research on your birth date. And then from that information we get on your birth date, not one tribe, but a culmination of lots of different beliefs and different tribe beliefs. And we take that information, we write a book about you. When your book is finished,
I think people like Lynn Andrews and Carlos Castaneda and Jamaki Highwater and Swift Deer and Rolling Thunder and all these people, they've taken advantage of an ignorant public. I think some people generally want to know things. They really do, but these other people, they have the white power and privilege to do these things, so they'll go around and do that. They always seem to make a lot of money behind all this.
There's fees. The fees cover our cost. We don't make anything. We don't have our nonprofit from the government yet, but everything here at Earthwalkers is nonprofit. It works. I think that's the big thing we want to share is this way works. There's a way to do it in honor, reverence, and respect.
Okay. So in that clip, we saw white people literally selling Native spiritual experiences to other non-Native people while also claiming that they're actually a nonprofit organization. We clearly see from their brochures, which I have a screenshot of on the screen, that they do in fact charge for these experiences, namely a vision quest ceremony. In Jackie Krogmeyer's article, Native American Culture Not for Sale, in Native culture, and of course there is variation across tribes, she defines a vision quest as the process by which a Native person seeks guidance and spiritual power from the spirit world. Depending on the nation, vision quests are undertaken at different times for different reasons. For some tribes, the vision quest is a necessary part of growing up and making the transition from child to adulthood. Others do not go on vision quests until ready to accept adult responsibilities entirely. In different tribes, a vision quest is undergone anytime a person is struggling with the challenges of life and must seek supernatural help. In still others, the vision quest is only intended for those privileged to be called medicine people. Put simply, a vision quest is a sacred and valuable ceremony, a rite of passage. It's not an experience you can buy for $75, meals and camping included. And we can get the next slide, thank you. So we've looked at the commodification of vision quests. Now we're gonna look at sweat lodges. Unfortunately today, big companies have commercialized the sweat lodge and are marketing it as a detoxifying experience with a number of health benefits such as weight loss, reduced stress, better skin, and improved quality of sleep. And on the screen, we see a picture of what the Shape House calls an urban sweat lodge. And we're gonna talk about that in a minute. If I can get the next slide. So the Shape House is just one business that has appropriated the sweat lodge. This is their description from their website. Trim down, tone up, sweat it out, where holistic wellness and modern convenience meet to burn calories, deepen sleep, improve skin, lift moods, and change lives. And also here I've included screenshots from the Shape House's website that list their price options to participate in a sweat. For one session a month, it's $52. For 4 sessions, it's $195. And for 8 sessions, it's $364. A sweat lodge is an incredibly sacred and deeply spiritual and communal method of healing. It's not an experience one pays for or that another profits from. Referencing, oh, can we go back one slide? Thank you. Referencing Jackie Krogmeyer's article again, the sweat lodge ceremony is used for cleansing. The authors of Crying for a Vision, the Native American Sweat Lodge Ceremony as Therapeutic Intervention, who analyze the use and benefits of the sweat lodge as therapy for Native and non-Native people, describe sweat therapy as the combination of intense heat exposure with psychotherapy or counseling, ideally incorporating group process. The sweat lodge itself represents for Natives the universe and the origins of life, as the circular dome structure is like the womb. Cardinal directions are typically used in a sweat lodge ceremony. East is characterized as belonging and connection to others. South is the sense of achievement in one's life and the acknowledgement of one's skills. West is physical awareness and independence, and North is wisdom and generosity. The sweat lodge is used by Natives to rebalance themselves along these directions and to seek mental and physical wellness within their community. And I'd like you to keep this information in mind as we return to the film White Shamans and Plastic Medicine Men. And we're going to listen to some words from Tony Nkoshola and Dennis Jennings in this clip. The sound is now working again. There we go.
They have only seen the profit side. I've heard people where they charge anywhere from $50 to $100 to take you into a sweat lodge, which to me is very hurtful to the ancestors who looked at the sweat lodge as a place of sacredness.
You know, when somebody is trying to teach you something, and if the message is real, it shouldn't cost you anything. That learning is free. That sharing is free. And if there's somebody that's going to sell you a sweat lodge or sell you a ceremony, well, that simply violates the spirit of that very act. It's like somebody trying to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. It can't be done. And it's the same with Indian ceremonies. It just simply can't be done.
So I'm going to leave those words at that. But the last thing I'll discuss in this presentation is tourism. This is a picture of Devil's Tower, known as Mado Dipala, which translates to Bear Lodge in Lakota. It's located in Wyoming. Devil's Tower was declared the first U.S. national monument in 1906 and is currently operated by the National Park Service. And really quickly, I want to show everyone a short clip of the tower so we can see what it looks like up close. This is also a chance for us to sort of marvel at its beauty. And don't worry about the sound. There is no sound for this clip. So if it's silent, that's okay. Native tribes, such as the Cheyenne River Sioux, Arapaho, Crow, Kiowa, Lakota Sioux, and Eastern Shoshone know Devil's Tower as a sacred site. It is a place of prayer and ceremony. Sweat lodges, sun dances, and other ceremonies are still practiced at the monument today. The most common ritual that takes place are prayer offerings. Colorful cloths or bundles are placed near the tower, commonly seen along the park's trails, and represent a personal connection to the site. For non-natives, however, Devil's Tower is primarily considered a world-class rock climbing location. Rock climbers flock to the tower every year for climbing, pounding bolts into the rock walls defacing the monument. Climbing is particularly popular in the month of June because of the relatively good weather. However, June is also an especially sacred time for nearby tribes, as this is when most of their ceremonies are performed. And yeah, let's go to the next slide. Okay. The National Park Service has asked climbers to voluntarily refrain from their activities during the month of June as to not disturb these ceremonies, but this request has been met with great opposition. Many climbers see it as an unfair endorsement of Native American religious rights over their own. The nearby tribes see the activities of the tourists and climbers and deem their activities to be destructive and disrespectful. In an interview, Trina Lonehill, the cultural liaison of the Oglala Lakota Sioux, expressed that the ban on climbing should be mandatory. She says, "It would be like climbing a big old cross. They wouldn't climb that. You don't disturb a sacred space. You have respect for it. To respect it is to not disturb it." If you go to blackhillsbadlands.com, a tourist resource website, they describe Devil's Tower in the following way. Devil's Tower, the huge volcanic colonnade monolith protruding up out of the northeast Wyoming plains, has long stirred the imaginations of climbers from all over the world. Climbers love the continuous cracks and symmetric dihedrals formed by the jointing of the columns that make up the rock mass. Guide yourself, or with the right instruction, it's entirely possible that you could climb the summit with a day or two of training and a day for a summit attempt. Wouldn't that be a great vacation story and photo? There are several guidebooks currently available for Devil's Tower. Sylvan Rock's Climbing School and Guides offers services for new and experienced climbers. No matter if you just want to discover what the excitement of rock climbing is all about, or if you've been climbing for years, the Black Hills has a great adventure waiting for you. Businesses like Sylvan Rocks, if I can get the next slide, Jamesy. Thank you. Businesses like Sylvan Rocks have made a lot of money giving tourists guided climbings of Devil's Tower. Here are some screenshots from their website listing the different climbing options along with the pricings. Sylvan Rocks offers 3 different plans. The crag day is only 8 hours and costs $500 for one person. A 2-day climbing is $925, and a 3-day climbing is $1,200. And for group climbs, they charge even more. Included under each price, if you look on their website, is a sentence of information about the climbing closure during the month of June. It reads, Devil's Tower is of cultural significance to many American Indian tribes. Out of respect for the Native American tribes, Sylvan Rocks encourages guests and all rock climbers to honor the voluntary June climbing closure. Please enjoy other summits during the month of June. So naturally, I clicked on the blue link to learn more about the closure, and I came across an interesting line. And if you go to the next slide, Jimsy, we can read that. It says, the climbing management plan and the June voluntary climbing closure are set up as a means to mitigate the desires and rights of both climbers who worship the tower by climbing on it and those who hold the site sacred in other ways. I don't think that tourists who want to climb and desecrate a sacred site for fun and recreation are in any way comparable to Native people with deep historical, cultural, and spiritual connections to the site who have practiced prayer and ceremony at Devil's Tower since time immemorial, even before it was called Devil's Tower. The next slide, Jimsy, thank you. So to conclude, businesses run by non-Native people selling Native spiritual experiences not only exploit Native people and their sacred religious beliefs and practices, but they also further the normalization of these practices among non-Natives. Additionally, businesses that cash in on the desecration of sacred sites, selling fun, recreational experiences, demonstrate the brutality of capitalism and colonialism. There is a complete disregard not only for Native people's spirituality, but also for their places of worship and ceremony. This is why the appropriation and commodification of Native spirituality by non-Native people, especially white people, is problematic, because Natives still struggle to practice their spirituality on their sacred sites today. The bottom line is that nothing sacred is ever for sale, period. To echo some of what Julia mentioned earlier, non-Native people are more than welcome to appreciate Native spirituality, and with the permission of certain tribal communities, may even be welcome to participate in ceremonies and practices. But you must understand and respect that aspects of our spirituality are closed and not available to non-Natives. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Tani and I'm an intern for the ARC. I use she, her pronouns and I'm Konkau Maidu. If you'd like to ask a question, please submit it using the Q&A box on Zoom, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So our first question is going to be for Kamiko. What do you personally wish everyone knew about Native spirituality?
I would say that I wish that everyone knew how deeply sacred Native spirituality is. I know we talked a lot about it in our different presentations, but that it is not just a religion, and it's not really religion, it's more of a way of life. And as far as, I guess, appropriation goes, it's, I would say, something that hold such a deep significant meaning to Native people and our ancestors, and that, you know, when, even if you come into question about are the things that you're doing spirituality wise are possibly I guess native spiritual ways, to really take some time to think about if it's something you should be doing, just because you know, we've had everything taken from us, our land, our rights, our water, and you know, we can't lose our culture, and people are hard at work trying to you know, revitalize Native spirituality and ceremonies. So thank you for the question, Connie.
Thank you for your thoughtful answer, Kamiko. Our next question is for Amanda, and it is, can you explain what an infringement is in relation to the AIRFA? And that's the American Indian Religious Freedom Act.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Tani. And thank you to whoever asked this question. So to clarify what I said before, IRFA is intended to protect certain ceremonial rights on a federal level. For instance, in the past, the government would confiscate sacred objects such as eagle feathers, because eagles are a protected species in America, as well as peyote, which is used for ceremonial purposes. So IRFA protects the government from making those confiscations. However, it applies on a federal level. As for a state and private level, I believe those protections are not in place, or at least they're not as firmly in place. So for instance, I believe you could still get fired if your company finds out you've been using peyote for ceremonial use, and you could still get fired based off of that. I would encourage you to do more research on that individually. I personally don't know too much about any cases relating to a state or a private level, but I know the protections do exist on a federal level. And as for that smaller scale, there's still ongoing debate, ongoing discussion, ongoing protesting to protect that right. So thank you for that question.
Thank you for that clarification, Amanda. Our next question is going to be for Julia. And it is, are there ways to be sure we are purchasing things from natives?
That's a good question. Thank you to whoever asked that. So as I said in my presentation, the Indian Arts and Crafts Act does make it illegal for non-natives to advertise their products as native made. So you can inquire, or oftentimes on the products you can look to see where it was made. But if you are wanting to buy native made products, most natives that do have like businesses freely advertise their tribe. I know in a lot of online businesses you can click about and it'll tell about their history, who makes the things, where they source them from. But definitely ask questions. And I know sometimes people do violate the law. I know Urban Outfitters has in the past where they do advertise things. So definitely hold big corporations accountable and kind of question them more, and shop small businesses. That's what I'd say. Thank you.
I think that was a great answer, Julia. Our next question is going to be for Sarah. How can we find middle ground so that people who like to do things outdoors can enjoy nature while respecting Indians too?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the main things is just to do your research ahead of time before you go out on a trip, or if you have a particular interest in a certain place that you want to go explore or whatever. Yeah, just doing your research. A simple Google search is all I had to do to find out about, Devil's Tower and the history behind it and the significance it has to the tribes nearby. I mean, this information, I got most of it from the National Park Service website. And so it's not like I had to dig deep for any of this. So yeah, doing your research. I know one thing, and you could see in my slides, that there are signs that say like, do not disturb the prayer bundles, or don't touch any of that stuff, like leave that stuff alone. And a lot of people like when they go visit Devil's Tower, when they walk on those trails, they kind of ignore those signs, and that's why they're there, but people will still, go mess with things, touch them. And that's not right. So making sure that you're respecting the boundaries of the place that you're visiting and respecting the rules. I know that the ban on climbing is voluntary in June, but take that maybe think of that ban as mandatory and don't climb in June. I mean, don't climb at all if you can, because it is a sacred site. But yeah, doing your research ahead of time before you go and visit somewhere, I'd say that's the most important thing.
Great advice. Thank you, Sarah. All right. And then we have another question for Kamiko. Is it wrong for non-natives to learn spiritual practices from natives and participate if they feel connected to it and want to learn?
Good question. So this is from my personal opinion. This is not an overall arching opinion for natives in general. But I think that a non-native person coming into, I guess, native spiritual practices and wanting to, I guess, convert to a native cultural practice or religion is not, I guess, not a good thing to do. It's in a way appropriating native culture still, even if you feel some sort of connection to it. I personally don't think that is, it's not the same connection that a native person gets through their ceremonies, because these things are rooted in our ancestry and in our blood, and they're very important because of where we come from. So I would say, in a way, it's, if you're invited to a ceremony, it's okay to watch and be an ally to Native people in participating and honoring that, like, you were able to go to that ceremony. But I would not personally feel comfortable if someone were to try and become a part of doing those spiritual practices, because they aren't open for everyone. And anyone else on the team, feel free to answer that question also. Thank you.
I think I'd also like to say something in regards to that. When I get this, I just question, why does this person not want to research their own roots and see what their ancestors, what their people, what their family practiced? And I think that just has an even deeper meaning, since it's ancestral, since it's within your blood. I just question why you're pursuing other people, not in a bad way, just asking people to re-examine their approaches. But yeah.
Thank you, Julia and Kamiko. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of beautiful cultures out there, and definitely feeling that connection to your own would have a lot of meaning. So our next question is going to be for Amanda. And it is, are there laws like the ones you spoke about in other countries?
Second question. I can't state the specific laws right now, but I did take, there's a class offered at UCSC called Native Americans in Museums, taught by Amy Lonetree, and we did go a little bit more into detail about that. And I believe there are a few laws intact in, I want to say, Australia and Canada for Indigenous peoples there, because they've had some repatriation go on, where museums have given back the bones and the pots of ancestors. There's even ceremonies being created currently, to reburial ceremonies that are being created in their language to accommodate for this new phenomenon where we're having to rebury our ancestors that have been unearthed by archaeologists. That falls more under the NAGPRA, the Graves and Repatriations Act, which I really do encourage people to look that up. It's a very fascinating topic, just all the politics involved with that. There's even some fun comics that talk about it and break it down for all the comic lovers out there. But yeah, it's definitely not applied to all countries as far as I know, and there's definitely a lot of work that still needs to be done, even with our own country, and fighting for repatriation and sacred sites. So, do your research and find out ways you can support that. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. All right. Our next question is going to be for Julia. And it is, where can I research more about Native spiritual appropriation so I can be more conscious in the future?
That's a good question. I thank you for wanting to be involved in correcting issues like this. I think, first of all, it's helpful to know whose land you're on. And there are some tools, I can put something in the chat later where you can figure that out, and to familiarize yourself of the people who live on or used to live on your lands, because that's really important, supporting the communities that you're involved in. And then also just surrounding yourself with Native people, following, especially on social media, following Native law accounts, Native American, so like not just celebrities, but like philosophers, different thinkers, just people in our field who do speak about these issues, because I feel like a lot of Natives, we consider these issues close to our heart. So we're always posting about them. We're always providing information, and just using Google. You can look stuff up. You can look up Native American appropriation, and stuff will come up. And Jemsy put the, I think, Native Land CA in the chat. So that's very helpful. But yeah, definitely do the work, and intentionally surround yourself with more Native people, because we are still here. We're still dealing with these issues, and opportunities will come up where you will be asked to be an ally, and I hope you will. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer, Julia. Our next question is going to be our last question for the night, and it's to Sarah. Do you know if these organizations have been approached about their appropriation?
I did not look into that, but I do know that as far as Devil's Tower goes, that tribes in the surrounding area have been asking people to not climb on the monument at all, because it is a sacred site. And as they're pounding, because when you're rock climbing, you have these bolts with you, and you're like pounding them into the rock and like using it to like stabilize yourself so you can get to your next step. And so they've been asking people to, like, can you please stop doing that, because this is like our site of ceremony and prayer. So I do know that there's been asks to, like, people please don't climb. And I do agree with Trina Lonehill that I mentioned in my presentation, that the ban on climbing should be mandatory. In my opinion, it shouldn't be just during the month of June, but it should be all the time. Nobody should be able to climb that monument ever. But yeah, as far as the Shape House goes, the urban sweat lodge place, I don't think that they've been called out for their appropriation as far as I know. I do know that this particular business is popular among celebrities. And even if you go to their website, they have like a promo video of like, there's like LL Cool J and Selena Gomez talking about how their health has totally changed after going to one of their sweat lodges. But yeah, I'm not too sure if they've been called out for their appropriation of these Native practices, but that's a really great question. And I'll definitely look into that after this. So thank you. Oh, and also just wanted to mention that we're really sorry if we didn't get to your question, but we thank you for asking them.
Thank you so much for that answer, Sarah. And yeah, thank you for all your questions. We're so sorry if we couldn't get to them all. You guys asked some really awesome questions. As we conclude our spirit presentation tonight, Julia will be giving some closing thoughts about Native resilience in the face of oppression.
Thank you, Tani. I put a list of resources in the chat for anyone who'd like to look at them. So to conclude this event, despite a history of criminalization and the policing of Native American spirituality, we are a resilient people. We're still here, whether that be on our reservations, in cities, wherever. We're alive and thriving and reclaiming our identities. Tribes all over the country are working to revitalize their languages, foodways, land stewardship, and traditional medicines as a way to heal our spirits. The return to our traditional ways has proved to be a medicine in and of itself. For example, the local, or at least local to Santa Cruz, Amma Mutsun Tribal Band has successfully been running a language revitalization program since early 2010, and they have a relearning garden here at the UCSC Arboretum. Additionally, after 113 years, The 18,800 acres of grassland, woodland, and wildlife that comprise the National Bison Range, along with its resident bison herd, will be returned to the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. This was a huge victory for Indian country, and we're still celebrating it today. Lastly, Indigenous female hikers worldwide, but especially in the Americas, are doing the work to reclaim and accurately rename hiking trails on their lands as a way to recognize and honor their ancestors and the generations who will come after them. The acceptance and re-education of Native American histories and identities have allowed for a more unified movement to regain our rights, protect sovereignty, and properly care for the environment. Non-Native allies have rallied in support with us to preserve sacred water sources, discard racist mascots, protect closed traditions, and bring awareness to disproportionate levels of violence Native people and especially women face. We're rebuilding our communities alongside Indigenous peoples worldwide and non-Native allies. Native Americans are strong and resilient, and we're doing the work to ensure that our spirits reflect that. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for that beautiful conclusion. And thank you everybody for coming out for our presentation and for all of your really beautiful questions. Thank you for engaging with us tonight. If you are interested in learning more about careers that focus on health and well-being, please contact Christina Hall at chmhall@ucsc.edu. And for more information on how to stay up to date with the career and success, they can be contacted at this phone number and this email address. If folks would like to stay up to date on what's happening with the AIRC, we have Facebook, Instagram, and a website where you can sign up for our weekly newsletter. We also have a YouTube channel where you can watch the recordings of our previous virtual events, and that YouTube channel will be UCSC American Indian Resource Center. Tonight's event, along with previous two, were recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel sometime next week. We will be sharing it via email with everyone who has registered for tonight's event. Also, please be sure to complete the event evaluation form. We would really appreciate your feedback so we can continue to improve our events. All UCSC students who fill one out will be entered to win one of 4 $50 Target e-gift cards. The form will be linked in the chat. We want to recognize the entire AIRC and POCSC team who worked to organize this event today. And of course, our event would not be possible without our in-house Zoom expert, our program coordinator, Jemsy Ortiz, and our outstanding director, Dr. Hernandez. Thank you again, everyone. Take care and good night.